Hi, I'm Anna Denton-Jones from Refreshing Law Limited, and as well as being a solicitor who specialises in dealing with employment law issues, I'm also a trained mediator. In this session, I want to talk about mediation and when it might be suitable for employees. And this session is very much aimed at employees who might be thinking about either asking their employer to consider mediation as a route to dealing with some conflict between them and a colleague, or perhaps the employer has suggested mediation to the employee and the employee wants to understand a little bit more about what that means. Mediation is a facilitated process where somebody like myself, or it could be somebody internal within an organisation, comes in and gives the individuals an opportunity really to talk through what the issues that have led to some conflict between them are, to perhaps dig a little bit deeper and explore perhaps how we've got to where we are today, and very much with a view to looking at how we might resolve that conflict going forward. Often conflict can arise because of people's behaviours towards each other, and sometimes when people have understood how each other feels about certain behaviours, they can agree that they won't behave in that way towards each other anymore. So it's very much looking at the future, trying to become focused on how we can move away from the background and the history and work in a positive way together going forward. Now, it's natural if you are considering mediation to perhaps feel a little bit nervous about going through the process. I don't think I've met anybody yet who wasn't feeling that way at the beginning of the process. That's entirely natural. It's also natural to have some reservations about whether it's going to work. Is the other person going to be as committed to it? And, I'd certainly say to anybody who's thinking about engaging in mediation, you really do need to want to find a solution and go into it with that goal in mind. Both parties do need to want to do something about the current situation. Often if people have got reservations, I'll put it to them, well, what happens if we don't look at talking about things? What happens if we don't explore things in further detail? What is the status quo? And quite often people will tell me that the current tension in work is actually making them unwell. Perhaps they're losing sleep at night, or they're worrying about coming to work in the morning, or they're just not enjoying their job anymore. And I'd always put it to people, well, if we don't try mediation, what happens? Is that situation going to get worse? Nothing's going to change. Is this something that we can at least try to improve things and move things forward? In terms of the basics, the process is voluntary. No employer should be forcing any employee down this road. Both parties have to come to it willingly, otherwise there's no point in doing it. Typically, anything that is discussed in a mediation stays confidential. I might sometimes keep some notes so that I can ask questions and things as we go along, but certainly at the end of the mediation process I would destroy those notes. I certainly don't show them to the employer who is perhaps paying for me to be there. I would only ever report back to the employer whether or not the mediation had been successful or not, whether an agreement had been reached between the parties or not. I would only ever disclose the contents of that agreement if the parties had asked me to, or report back something to HR or the employer that the parties had again specifically consented or asked me to do. So very much it's intended that what's sort of discussed in the room stays in the room unless the parties otherwise agree, and that's absolutely critical. So although an employer might be funding mediation, I think it's important that you realise that context and that confidentiality that's there. So what happens at a mediation? Well, the initial stage is likely to be meeting with the mediator, and obviously you can talk about any concerns and ground rules and things for the process, but the first stage, the initial stage really, is to explore individually what somebody's feelings and thoughts about the conflict are. So typically I'd meet with somebody in a meeting where there isn't a particular time frame. The meeting can take as long as it needs, and it's an opportunity for somebody to kind of unpick what's going on in their heads. And sometimes that in itself is a very powerful session. It gives people the opportunity to explore what's been going on and how they feel about it. And I find that just the act of somebody feeling that somebody's listened to them is very valuable. People feel better just from having had that opportunity to get things off their chest. During that session, I'd be exploring with that person what I think the threads of what they're saying are, and perhaps asking them to unpick things a little bit further. And perhaps by having to explain it to me, it becomes clearer in their own minds. I would be perhaps asking them to reflect on how the other person might be feeling and to consider what they might be saying to me as part of the process, and where the conflict might have emerged from. Once we've been through that, we talk about what happens next. And the second stage of the process is likely to be a mediation meeting between both parties. And that's really a meeting where it's in a safe environment. There are ground rules that are set. So, I'm not going to let anybody bully or harass somebody else or speak to them in an inappropriate way. But it's an opportunity for each person to say how they feel to the other. And again, that's really powerful, somebody having the opportunity to actually tell somebody how their behaviour, for example, has affected them, and to feel that they're actually listened to and that that's taken seriously. Both individuals concerned have the opportunity to go through that process and say what they feel with the other person listening, and that's listening without interrupting. And by this time, clear themes will have emerged, and my job as a mediator is to start to try and pull those threads out and start getting everybody to look at those and to hopefully move forward to a situation where they can agree things for the future, so that we don't end up with that conflict continuing. And that's the aim of the game, is for everybody to go away from the mediation process happy that they know what they're doing and that the issues have been put to bed. Sometimes it doesn't work. I'm not going to pretend that this is a wonderful solution, you can wave a magic wand and everything will be fine. If relationships have broken down between the parties and trust has gone, it is hard. You can't necessarily rebuild that trust. Sometimes people can and they're willing to give it a go and to try, but sometimes people have actually reached a point where they don't want to. And it can be important for people to actually acknowledge that and decide perhaps what the consequences of agreeing that they don't want to work with somebody anymore are. And, that does happen in mediation processes. That's probably enough for now. If anyone has got any questions about mediation, please do email me. It's adenton@refreshinglawltd, all one word, .co.uk. Thank you very much.